Matt, we got a really interesting fight at 135 pounds between Ray the Tazmexican Devil Borg and Mayhem Nathan Maness, and it's Maness' UFC debut, so let's give credit where credit's due. Former TKO champion, had a big win over Canada's Jesse Arnett, and then in his next fight, ended up losing to Taylor Lapilus, somebody that, you know, UFC fans might be familiar with from his time with the promotion, a guy that trains under Ferdinand Lopez over in France. And in that fight, it was one of those ones where Lapilus just dominated the entire thing until he got the finish win. And for Nathan Maness, and I don't want to take too much away from him, but, you know, really riding a great wave into that Jesse Arnett fight. He was undefeated. He looked amazing. Like I said, the lone loss is to Lapilus. And Arnett pushed the pace. And the nice thing that Maness did in that fight, he was constantly switching stances. Even in the Lapilus fight, did the same thing. Switch. He switched into southpaw, landed a nice left hand, really rocked Arnett, followed it up. Nice TKO with the ground and pound. He earns the belt. Then he loses that fight to Lapilus. Then a little bit of time away. Fights on the regional scene. Picks up a nice knockout win over a guy who was 3-2 at the time. So kind of a tune-up, so to speak. A guy that's a roofer in his, you know, average everyday job. That from an interview with Low Kick MMA's James Lynch, friend of the show. And he's had a couple of weeks to get ready for this, about a week and a half, 2 weeks in camp, getting ready for Ray Borg. And it's one of those ones that it's a tough matchup for anyone. But for Maness, he's going to have a huge height and reach advantage. And I think that's going to play somewhat of a factor. I mean, this is a guy that's going to have 6 inches of height and 9 inches of reach on Ray Borg. I mean, we know that Borg is a guy that challenged for the belt at 125 pounds and had the highlight reel submission against him by Demetrius Johnson. But it's one of those fights where, you know, styles make fights, and we've had a couple like this. Timur Valiev taking on Jamal Emmers is a similarity. You got a smaller guy that's a lot more busy. You got a taller guy that if he can kind of establish range and really use his boxing, he can find a good, you know, rhythm. That's exactly what I was looking for. He can find decent rhythm. So it's one of those ones that's really interesting, but for me, it's a tough hill to climb, and it's going to be the opposite. It's a tough hill to climb for Maness in his UFC debut, because Ray Borg, even in some of these losses, has shown flashes that he's a great fighter. It's just a shame that things couldn't get put together at 125 pounds.
And that's the thing. Ray Borg's one of the few fighters whose stock seems to rise even when he does lose the fight. And I really think the Ricky Simone fight in his last one proves that more than any other, because I thought he was going to get absolutely dominated by Simone. I really did. I thought Simone's a bigger guy. He's just kind of better than Borg at everything, and he's got legit KO power. Not like absurd or anything, but he can put him down. And Ray Borg really held his own in the one area of the fight that I didn't think he was going to. I thought if Ray Borg was going to have any success, he'd have to wrestle Simone. He didn't. It was actually the opposite. Ray Borg was getting the better of the striking exchanges to the point where Simone decided he'd wrestle Ray Borg. Now, again, I think that fight just came down to Ricky Simone's a little bit bigger than Ray Borg. Once he gets bigger. Exactly. And once he gets on top in some of those positions, it's just hard for Ray Borg to scramble. But against a guy like Maness, I don't know if he gets on top of Ray Borg is going to be able to scramble back up to his feet. He's that high level of a grappler. And I know that's the thing. Everyone likes to discredit the grappling of Ray Borg because he was on the receiving end of arguably the greatest submission of all time, the old suplex to an armbar, oldest trick in the book. And Ray Borg, he's a guy who shows you something a little bit different every single fight. He'll go from very heavy volume into takedowns, go back to volume, and sometimes he'll kind of sit back on his punches, so you never really know what you're going to get from Ray Borg, and that's really what I like about his style, really. It's just a really hard ask of Maness to come in on short notice in your UFC debut to fight a former title challenger. I understand he's got a lot of the physical attributes that might match up well against a guy like Ray Borg, but when you look at them stylistically, there's not a single thing Maness does better than Ray Borg.
The trouble for me, again, if you want to go back and watch those last 3 fights, so the Arnett fight, and I kind of buried it a little bit, but I really want to get into it now because Jesse Arnett's one of those guys that's been on the scene for a long time, not just in Canada, but in North America. He's a really recognizable name, fought with Fight League Atlantic and Truro not that long ago in their inaugural show. But he's one of those guys that you recognize, and you've seen him fight some of the higher level guys. And in that fight against Maness where he was going to defend his belt, he pushed the pace and threw kicks and pushed. And Maness, you could see, I mean, his boxing is quite good. He will throw a kick of his own. He switches stances, and it was interesting to hear it on the call because you had John Ramdeen and Robin Black, who used to be with Fight Network, but they do a really good job in breaking things down. And the one thing that Robin Black was noting is the fact that Maness, he'll set up orthodox and then he'll switch to southpaw. And Robin kept saying, it's really not his dominant side. Once you give that up, you're really giving up all of your defenses as well. And you could see where Arnett was starting to kind of build off of that until Maness, who was in southpaw, landed a nice shot and finished him from that, off bit of a look. So it was a good win. I wouldn't say it was a fluky win because it was a nice left hand that he landed right down the pipe, and he had the wherewithal to finish it up. So he has that instinct. But in the Lapalus fight, it was more the same, where it was just pressure, pressure, pressure. He had the body kick, the finish, and that's how he ended up losing. Now, his last fight, again, it was a guy that was 3-2. He was doing the same thing, switching stances, looked good, landed a nice overhand right that rocked him, and then he finished it up by TKO. But it is a tough task to really kind of ask a guy to come in on somewhat of short notice to take on a guy in Ray Borg that's fought for the title, that has such good wrestling. And again, if this was just a kickboxing fight, I would have to give props to Ray Borg too, because he does well and he can land combinations. It would be very difficult to try and get in close against a guy that has this big of an advantage in terms of reach and height. But I think Ray Borg, with that added wrestling X factor, I think that leads credence to a win for Borg. Now, it's interesting because he's a minus 230 favorite. Maness coming in plus 185 in his debut. If you look over on Tapology, it has 676 votes, 83% going with Borg, the same percentage predicting a decision win for him. And I think I would almost have to agree with the crowd there.
It's hard to disagree. And Maness, it's not like he's going to go out there and get finished. He's not just an opponent that the UFC picked up so that Ray Borg go out there and dominate. It'll be an entertaining fight, and he's going to put up a pretty good fight. But again, Ray Borg, there's not a single aspect of MMA he's bad at. It's just some guys are better than him in some different little aspects. He's just a very well-rounded guy. So it is kind of a good measuring stick for Maness coming into the UFC, just because if you beat a guy like Ray Borg, I mean, that's it. You're fighting top 15 guys from there on out. And that's the problem with some of these matchups, though. You're setting a guy like him up for failure no matter what the result of this fight is, because even if you lose to Ray Borg, no big deal. You go back to the drawing board, you can come back, you can fight another prospect. If you beat Ray Borg, though, it's going to be the Alexander Hernandez effect, where, okay, you beat Beneil Dariush, you only get named opponents from that point on, and it's going to be a rocky road. So no matter what happens, it's going to be tough for Maness, so I'm going to pick Ray Borg, probably by decision as well.
I'm going to go with Ray Borg as well. You're not going to want to miss the rest of our predictions for the card. We have 11 fights total, not the 15 that we had last weekend, so keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt. And as we always say, let's get into it.